Welcome to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life. What does thriving actually mean? Thriving is not a word, it's an action, a way of living. And that's what the Best Living Show is all about. So get ready, step into a new narrative, and find a new way of being. There's a beautiful connection, a spark that flies at the intersection between the genetic code and your internal guidance system. We're going to throw away the culture that will tell us that thriving is something only for a few. Every one of us is unique. It's our time to discover why. The Best Living Show starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet, and I am excited about tonight's show. We have Nathalie Niddam is joining us here, and she is. I met her. I've met her a while ago through online and things like that, but actually met her in person earlier this year when she gave a talk on what we're going to be discussing tonight, and that's the bioregulators. And it was fascinating. I had not heard about them until that point, really. And so I'm hoping that we will shed light on what these bioregulators are, what they do, and how they can be useful in promoting a life of longevity and thriving. And so welcome to the show, Nathalie.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, let me give you a little introduction. Nathalie is a holistic nutritional human potential and epigenetic coach. She also hosts her own podcast, and she is a longevity biohacker. She's a self-proclaimed science geek with a passion for human health. She's also a certified holistic nutritionist and focuses on longevity health span when she works with clients. And a few years ago, she stumbled on peptides at a human optimization conference and was captivated by their potential. And this became a catalyst for kind of moving in a direction that has really she's become a sought after speaker, someone of expertise in the area of peptides and bioregulators. And from that, she has a Facebook community that's, several thousand and going strong. It's called Optimizing Superhuman Performance. And they have banters and conversation about all of these incredible compounds. And of course, it's the topic that she discusses in her podcast called Biohacking Superhuman Performance, which has become a top 100 podcast in the United States and Canada, which is amazing. Of course, Nathalie has a passion for longevity. So this is the lens that she looks to promote health and, wants to promote vibrant health, boundless energy, focusing on a healthy mind and body. And she works with clients one-on-one. And also she's got these communities I talked about on Facebook. And I know that she speaks at several conferences throughout the year here in the United States and internationally about peptides and bioregulators. So I'm excited to dig into this. I was introduced to peptides about 3 years ago, and have taken a couple of peptides myself. One of them I think a lot of people have heard of, which is a BPC 157. I was having some joint pain and I thought, okay, let's see what this is all about, and took it. And I actually, for me, found that it worked, and my joint pain got less. And since then, with exercise, my knees have been getting stronger, and I found it to be helpful. And I don't stay on it all the time. I've did some, and then I went off. And then if I start to feel like perhaps I need to have a little bit more, I'll go on that. So I kind of got introduced to peptides that way. And then of course, we started seeing them showing up in things like skincare and, other products. And they started to become a little bit more, shall we say, of a household name. And now people will say like, oh, I went somewhere and I wanted to know about peptides. And they're not really, they're hearing about it and they're not really sure kind of what they're looking for, but they know it's out there and they know that it can help. And it's actually a natural substance, something that's in our bodies already, but by taking them, we can enhance that process of what they do for us. But the bioregulators is something I didn't know about until April. And I was fascinated by this because they are much smaller. And from what was interesting to me was that they get into the DNA and start working at that level to promote health. So that was what really sparked me to want to know more about this because of that interaction with our code, our blueprint. So I'm super excited, as I said, to get into this. So Natalie, I'll let you start to tell us, how did bioregulators come about? Like, I know when you talked, you talked about them coming out of Russia many years ago, but tell the listeners kind of what's the history on the bioregulators.
Sure. So the bioregulators really are, there's about 4 decades of research behind them. So definitely, in many ways, they have probably more human research behind them than a lot of the longer chain peptides that you were talking about a minute ago. Like the BPC 157 has quite a lot of research behind it. Unfortunately, it still lives in the shadows of regulatory bodies. And, as of 24 hours ago, compounding pharmacies have been informed they're not allowed to synthesize
Oh, wow. That's a
most of the
shame.
peptides. Yeah,
Mm,
I'm hoping that it's going to be a thing that actually gets people, riled up enough to kind of stand
mm,
up and start to make some noise because
yeah.
it's as you mentioned, I have a very large community. It's actually over 20,000 people now. And in that
Wow.
community, we hear stories of people whose lives have really been changed and
Hmm.
whose health outcomes are dramatically improved because they have access to these through doctors who get them through compounding
Hmm.
pharmacies. So
Hmm.
anyway, that's my little kind of soapbox rant for the night. It might come back again, but for now,
That's okay. That's
um,
okay. I mean, I agree with you. I think like we definitely need to have a voice here that says, hey, don't limit this, don't regulate this, because I know I'm like you. I've heard stories from multiple people how they're beneficial.
yeah, no, I mean, I know people who can only function because, and it's great that we can get rid of our sore knees and reduce inflammation and heal our guts and all of these things, but
Hmm.
there are people who literally would not be able to function without certain
Hmm.
peptides. And but all that to say, you asked about the bioregulators. Let me distinguish for the audience what the difference is between a bioregulator and a bioregulator peptide. So a peptide between a peptide and a bioregulator peptide. A peptide is a small protein. It's 50 amino acids or fewer. Amino acids, as many of you might know, amino acids is the building block of protein. So it's like the single Lego blocks in your kid's Lego box, if your kids still play with Legos. And when they get put together into these intricate kind of chains that are folded in certain ways, they are then able to affect certain processes in the body by binding to certain binding sites on cells. Interestingly enough, a lot of the longer chain peptides that are not known as bioregulators per se also will influence gene expression. So the peptides ultimately are signaling molecules in our body, and whether they're doing that through a receptor on the cell or they're very, very tiny and able to get into the cell, into the nucleus, and then bind to DNA, which is what the bioregulator peptide does. That makes it that ultimate epigenetic switch. So the bioregulator peptides are 2 to 4 amino acids long. So they are the tiniest of the tiny peptides. And it is because of that tiny little size and also because of their polarity that they're able to get into the cell and do what they do at a genetic level. Um, the the man who really is behind the largest body of research and work around bioregulator peptides is a doctor and a researcher by the name of Vladimir Kavinson from Russia. And he was initially, as a young doctor in the military, was tasked by the military to find ways to restore health and function and protect their soldiers when they came back from missions, be they on a nuclear submarine that was not particularly well shielded, or maybe, they'd been injured, or they were very concerned at that time about weapons that were being developed in the West that could affect their vision. So they had this objective of restoring health and reversing damage. And the other group of people they were very concerned about, of course, were the astronauts they were sending out into space. And we know that they're affected greatly because they're exposed to a huge amount of radiation and, the lack of gravity and all those things. So they would come back and they'd really be in much worse shape than when they left. And they're kind of sitting there going, okay, this is all great, but what can we do to bring them, to restore them? Right.
Right.
And so that's how Professor Cavinson's journey began, if you will. And he essentially discovered these tiny little proteins that seemed to have this incredible ability to trigger protein production at a cellular level within the body. And so he's identified probably well over this number of bioregulators, but he identified, isolated, and commercialized about 21 different bioregulators. And each one of those bioregulators is coming from and affecting a very specific tissue, gland, or organ. So to put that into real English, people are probably sitting there going, what is she talking about? So, one of the most famous bioregulators, and as Rachelle said, peptides and peptide bioregulators, they're just starting to bubble up into the mainstream, probably into the very early adopter group of the mainstream, people who are very interested in longevity and rejuvenation, like in that space. They're starting to become very, very much spoken about, probably more the longer chain peptides than the bioregulators, but nevertheless, the bioregulators are coming up as well. So to elaborate on that point that made no sense a few minutes ago that I talked about, the bioregulators are isolated from and extracted from these very specific tissues, glands, and organs from animals, generally from cows. It can be from pigs, and it can also be from sheep. And those tissues, glands, and organs are, I'm not going to name all 21 here, but starting with the pineal gland, which is a tiny little pine nut shaped gland in your brain that is incredibly important and regulates your circadian cycle. It normalizes melatonin. It activates an enzyme called telomerase, which means it helps to restore and preserve the length of the telomeres, which is those shoelaces at the end of your DNA that determines how many times your DNA can replicate, right? We need our DNA to replicate itself and ideally avoid mistakes. But anyway, telomerase is there.
Well, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a bit of a tall order, but it activates telomerase in order to restore telomeres. And so there are actually studies and trials that show that are ongoing, that are showing that people who use epidolon in particular, but all the bioregulators, we're seeing them reversing their biological age, both a lengthening of the telomeres and a reversal of biological age as measured by DNA methylation. Yeah. However, I've jumped ahead. So we've got the pineal gland bioregulator.
And I was actually going to say, I do know someone who used epidolon and did their pace of aging and did show that they went back. I forget how many years, but they did go back in time biologically, if you like. And
it's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you were talking about the different organs, and I think we have these within our organs also. We have these bioregulators, right? There's like a reserve of them within our own bodies as well, correct?
So kind of, I mean, so just to go through a couple more of the organs, and then I'm going to answer that as well. Okay. So you've got the pineal gland, you've got the central nervous system, you've got the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland, there's a bioregulator for the stomach, there's a bioregulator for lungs, for the heart, for blood vessels, for cartilage, for bone marrow, for ovaries, for testes, for the prostate gland, for kidneys. So you get the idea that this is like all the major organs, right? And we do produce bioregulators in our system. our entire lives, but we make less of them as we age, right? So our ability, and we all know, like as we age, our ability to recover and to repair starts to decline. The other big, very important bioregulator that I didn't mention yet is the thymus gland. So this is the seat of your immunity, right? And that thymus gland, we know, starts to involute kind of in our, depending on who you talk to, somewhere in your 20s, definitely by the age of 30, the thymus gland is starting to involute, which is a way of saying that it starts to kind of turn into fat almost, and it becomes less and less functional. And we know that as we age, the system in our body that most reliably starts to decline is our immune system. We talk about it all the time. It's one of the reasons why inflammation is such a massive issue. It's one of the reasons why maybe we get sick more easily as we get older, in addition to all of the lifestyle reasons why we may get sick and our immune system may go down, which we can talk about as well. So we make bioregulator peptides. And as you said earlier, even about the longer chain peptides, like the BPC 157s, the thymosin alpha 1, the thymosin beta 4, these are all fragments of proteins that are naturally occurring in the body. What's happened is that through research, people have identified them. They've isolated that part of that protein that is the one that causes or that drives certain functions in the body. And then they synthesize them synthetically in a lab so that they can be reintroduced to the body for therapeutic purposes.
Right.
So the bioregulator is typically, the difference between the peptides and the bioregulators is with the peptides, you can often feel an impact from that peptide or a difference. You can see it sometimes within days, in some cases within a couple of weeks, quite often within a month or two. With the bioregulator, depending on why you're using it and what the situation is, you may never really feel that much, right? With apidolon, because it's affecting circadian rhythm, because it's normalizing melatonin production. So the first thing to say is if you've got good melatonin production, you're not going to feel a difference. It's not going to change your melatonin production. And I think it's important to say this about the bioregulators in that if we could give them kind of human characteristic, their goal would not be to make you a superhuman. Their goal would be to restore you back to what we would call homeostasis, which is to bring you back into balance.
Right.
So when Professor Kavan-Zinn did studies on elderly people, which, are some of his most talked about studies really, but he's never stopped. Like he's got a lot of amazing literature and studies out there right now, but he did a couple of studies that really caught people's attention. And that is when he took older people who were I think they were 55 to 75 years old, maybe 65 to 75. I can't remember exactly the age range, but he took these people, he followed them for 12 years. And for the first 2 years of those 12 years, he had a control group. He had his test subjects. The control group were given an injection of polyvitamins, and the test subjects were given an injection of epithalamin, which is basically apidolon, but it's a biological extract of pineal gland that's been purified so that it can be injected into people. So for 2 years, you have two groups getting their shots. At the end of 6 years, the group who were getting the polyvitamins had a much higher all-cause mortality rate than the group who were getting their bioregulator. After 12 years, the difference was dramatic. It was like half the mortality rate in the bioregulator group than the test subjects. So then he kind of did a second study where now he chose people who were between the ages of 75 to 85. So he went for a much older population.
A much older group, yeah.
Yeah. And this time, because they were older, he only followed them for 6 years because he figured, you know what, they're all going to die anyway. They're probably not going to be enough around in 12 years. So we're just going to follow them for 6 years. And this time he had 3 groups. He had one group that were getting the polyvitamins. The second group were getting just apidolon or the epithalamin. And the third group was getting epithalamin and thymolin. And that is the thymus bioregulator. So on the third group, not only was he giving them this bioregulator that can affect the circadian cycle, melatonin production, telomerase, and is a master endocrine regulator. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but he also gave him a bioregulator that has been shown to help to restore function to the thymus gland, so bring back immune function. And in this study, the results were dramatic, right? The polyvitamin group, 88% of them were gone by the end of the 6 years.
Wow.
The group that got the epitolon did better, but the group that got the epitolon and the thymus gland, I think their mortality rate was 33%.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was a dramatic difference. And I keep flipping between epitolon and epithalamin, and I do want to explain this to your audience because one of the biggest problems with peptides in general is their names, right? It's
Right.
on the one side, it's alphabet soup.
Yes.
And on this side, it's a little bit like spending too much time at IKEA, right? We have
Yes.
epitolon, we have
Yes.
evolution, we have epithalamin.
That's great.
So every bioregulator has a minimum of 2, but generally 3 names.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things to remember. Epitolon is the name of the synthetic bioregulator. So this is when they've identified that, in this case, 4 amino acids and their arrangement, and they've been able to resynthesize it in a lab, and that is called epitolon. And that is generally administered either by sublingual spray, or it can be administered by subcutaneous injection. And now there's even little pills you can take.
Right.
Endolutin is the trademark name for the oral bioregulator that is a capsule, which is the extract of the pineal gland that's been purified, but it is an oral available as a pill bioregulator. Okay. Epithalamin is the biological extract. So it's still an extract of the pineal gland, but it has been prepared for intramuscular injection. And that form is actually, to my knowledge, it's virtually impossible to get outside of Russia. You can only imagine the legal hoops you'd have to fly through to
bring that
get
in,
something like this approved,
Yeah.
never mind exported, never mind all the issues that we're having with that part of the world these days, which is making, doing business with them very, very tricky. So in any event, I wanted to get that name thing out for sure. I wanted to get the name thing out of the way too, but just because there's so much confusion about it.
Yeah. So I was going to have a question about, because obviously a lot of times with the synthetic and natural, I think there isn't too much difference in how they affect. But how about the method of delivery? A lot of times injections more bioavailable than, sublingual or passing through the stomach. So are there studies that show kind of one better than the other?
So they actually are a little bit different in their effect. So in the Russian literature, what they talk about and what they will often do is if they have someone who's looking for a faster effect. So there's different ways of using bioregulators. There's using them therapeutically to support someone going through some kind of, medical intervention, let's say. Right. Or there's this idea of just using them prophylactically because we're getting older and we want to give our body the signal to kind of renew and refresh from within, right? And rejuvenate. So the synthetic, and I would say that the injection, number one, is the cheapest. It's the most cost effective, and it will be most likely the most efficient way to deliver the bioregulator. And it is the fastest acting, right? So you'll get a faster effect from the synthetic bioregulator than you will from the oral kind of gland or tissue extract. The oral bioregulators, the way that the Russians will talk about it is they will say it might take a little longer to see the effect, but the effect might last a little longer. And maybe that is because in that capsule, not only do you have the bioregulator, but you also have other cofactors that have been extracted along with the bioregulator. And so then we're starting to get into a world where maybe it's getting a little bit closer to something like a desiccated organ supplement, right? Which have been around for a long time. And we can imagine that those desiccated organ supplements also contain bioregulators, but maybe they're just not as concentrated as what you would get in the actual nutritional supplement.
Right. Okay. Totally makes sense. So you talked about for the bioregulators, all of the different organs that are involved. And I know when I heard you speak in April, you talked about you can take multiple of these at a time. And I know you talked about stacking them. And I know like you were involved in some studies as well with kind of how those stack together. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So basically, we have to think of the body as it's a series of complex systems that interact with each other, right? Like we can't, you're not going to just fix the thyroid or fix blood vessels or fix the heart. In my mind, we have to, especially when we're trying to accomplish something, you want to think of it as, okay, let's say somebody, and I'm not saying that this is going to fix your blood pressure, but I'm going to give you an example of blood pressure. Let's say somebody has a blood pressure issue. So now what we want to do is we want to think, okay, what are the different systems and organs that might have an impact on this blood pressure? So we might know that, as we age, our blood vessels become a little bit stiffer, or they're just not as supple and responsive as they need to be. And sometimes with blood pressure issues, the blood vessels are a problem, are part of the issue. So we might use the blood vessel bioregulator. We might also decide that the heart might need a little bit of help here, right? So we might stack the blood vessel bioregulator with the heart. In some cases with blood pressure, the kidneys might come into play. Certainly the kidneys get challenged when people have chronically high blood pressure. So we might want to give the kidneys some love. So now we have a stack that is our blood vessels, our heart, and our kidneys. Generally speaking, the blood vessel bioregulator and the pineal gland and or the brain, the central nervous system bioregulators, these are three that show up almost all the time. Because these are underpinning systems, if you will, to the functioning of our entire body. You can't have a well-functioning body if the central nervous system isn't working properly, if the pineal gland isn't tuned in, and if your blood vessels aren't in good enough condition to be able to deliver nutrients to the cells and to remove waste products from the cells. I mean, we can make an argument from pretty much every organ, but I would say that these three globally are going to need to be fine-tuned, and they are going to almost play a role in pretty much anything that you're trying to do. The other one that shows up over and over again, and that you're always going to at least cycle in some of the time, is going to be the thymus. Because again, like we said earlier, the thymus gland is going to be really central to healthy aging, longevity, thriving, just like you said earlier.
Right. Great. So we're going to take a short break here in a moment. And I'll come right back and talk more about the bioregulators, what they do, and some of Nathalie's experience with the bioregulators. But before we go to break, Nathalie, can you tell the listeners where they can find you so that they can, if they're really like, whoa, I really want to know more about this, where can they find you?
Thank you for that. So the easiest place to find me really is through my website. And that's where you can sign up for my newsletter. It's natniddam.com. And you can also find out about my private membership community, which is on Mighty Networks, which is where I spend most of my time these days. I'm spending a little less time on Facebook than I used to. But definitely there's always the Optimizing Superhuman Performance group, but the podcast, Biohacking Superhuman Performance, like you said before, but pretty much everything, Grand Central station is the website, natniddam.com, and that's where you can find everything.
Great. So if you're interested in learning more about peptides and bioregulators, you're just psyched about it from this conversation, head over to Nathalie's site and find out more. We'll be right back after this quick break. Thank you for listening to The Best Living Show. Hello, and welcome back to The Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. And we are joined this evening by Nathalie Niddam. She is the most expertise I know of anybody on peptides and these amazing little compounds that we've been talking about, bioregulators. And really, they are at the heart of longevity, thriving, and a way to promote health. So, we talked a little bit about kind of the structure, kind of where they come from, a little bit of the research. What is really, where is the field going now with bioregulators and as far as use of them with kind of the general public, if you like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that they're still very, very unknown. Like there's not, I mean, there are more people who are becoming aware of them. There's definitely more, there's more interest in them, even from doctors. There's a researcher who is working with Professor Kevinson right now on a pretty kind of large scale, I don't know if you can call it a clinical trial, but basically they've got about 200 people enrolled in this trial which I'm enrolled in as well, where we are taking bioregulators on a revolving door basis, if you will, it's a 3-year study. And
Okay.
the objective is to see, will taking bioregulator peptides help to reverse biological age? So for your audience, we have 2 ages, right? We have our chronological age, which is what our passport or our birth certificate may say. That's associated with our birthday. It's how many times around the sun have we been. Your biological age is the story that your cells tell in terms of how fast you're aging. And you mentioned earlier about pace of aging. And really, this is a marker that may be able to indicate your state of health really at a cellular level. And this is a very new field, and you've got a lot of different clocks, if you will, that have been developed, right? And so we've got the Dunedin pace of aging clock, which looks at how fast are you aging compared to time versus time.
Right.
So in a perfect world, we want a score under 1 so that we are aging slower than time. So I think the last time I measured mine, I think I was about 0.74. So I was
Excellent.
aging.
Yeah, mine was
not bad.
like not that good. Mine's
the
0.87, but that's
yeah,
good.
but that's okay, right? The cool thing is that you can change these things. Like they're not etched in stone. So this is what's really interesting. I think that, measuring people's biological age is all fine and good, but if you can't do anything about it, nobody would really wants to do it, right?
Yeah.
So, and what's interesting, and I'm not going to sit here, people are sitting there going, oh yeah, now she's going to say you need bioregulator peptides to reverse your age. I'm going to say that the bioregulator peptides may be helpful, but a lot of the things that we know that reverse biological age actually aren't peptides. A lot of them are lifestyle decisions and choices that we make, right?
I felt that when I went to a conference last year, and I went to many of the talks, and it became like a little bit of a joke, like, well, it all comes down to diet and exercise. But I think that's true. It really does come down to those lifestyle choices, and not just diet, exercise, stress, sleep, all of those things.
I think sleep and stress preclude almost even diet and exercise, right? Because if you think about it, if you're not sleeping properly, you're going to feel more stressed. If you're super stressed and not able to manage your stress, you're not going to be able to sleep. And if you're not sleeping, your hormones are going to be out of whack. Your ability to follow a decent diet is going to go right out the window. Your ability to your willingness to exercise and your ability to work out properly is also going to go out the window. So I think
it's like a cascade.
It's a complete, it's a total house of cards, right? So definitely, the interesting thing about the pace of aging is that it can be affected by lifestyle quite dramatically. Even fasting, things like fasting can be very impactful. And then we've got the other clocks, like the DNA methylation clock, which is which is a clock that was developed by a researcher by the name of Peter. I think his first name's Peter. I could be wrong. Oh no, Stephen Horvath. Sorry.
Yep, that's it.
And so he determined that if your biological age, as determined by his DNA methylation clock was 7 years older than your chronological age, you had a 50% higher chance of all-cause mortality, which is a way of saying we don't know what, but something's going to kill
Something
you.
will kill you.
Yeah, 50% higher chance than somebody else at your age who was at the same chronological and biological age. And conversely, if you were 7 years younger, you had a 50% lower chance of all-cause mortality, which does not include whether or not you're going to get hit by a bus because you're not watching when you cross the street, just to be clear, right? So the DNA methylation clock is a very powerful tool. It's very hard to move it, right? Interestingly enough, I was recently talking to Dr. Christopher Shade from Quicksilver, and I don't know if you've ever had him on your show, but he'd be an interesting guy to have. They have a 3-month BioAge reset, which starts with a 30-day detoxification protocol that supports your body's detoxification pathways, and then is followed up with a 30-day protocol that really goes after strengthening cellular membranes and cellular communication in the body, and still doing a little bit of detox there. And then the 3rd month is kind of more of an optimization protocol. And they took, I want to say it was like 60 or 70 people through that 3-month protocol, and they were able to show that they reversed their biological age at least by a year in almost all cases, and up to 7 years in a couple. So I will say that the bioregulator peptides are definitely showing in Bill Lawrence's trial, they're definitely showing that they're able to restore telomere length dramatically. I have a couple of presentations when I'm presenting where I'll throw up a table and show that in less than a year, in some cases, people like reclaim 20 to 30 years on their telomere length.
Wow.
The DNA methylation age takes a lot longer. But this BioAge reset shifted DNA methylation age itself, like within 3 to 4 months. So there's many different ways to skin this cat. But the way I like to refer to the bioregulator peptides is, imagine that you're driving on tires and the treads, the tread starts to wear down. The bioregulator peptide helps to restore the depth of that tread so that you don't end up with bald tires quite as quickly, right? You putting it off, you're lengthening the time of your tires. And we're doing this organ by organ, right? So imagine if we can help the pancreas, the islet cells to recover a little bit so that they're not quite as worn out, not quite as tired as they would otherwise be.
And I know like they're looking at the different clocks of aging now, and I think I know they're looking at measuring those different clocks too. Do you know if anybody's doing studies on the different clocks and bioregulators to see how they're interacting, or is that still kind of a little ways off yet?
Well, the thing is, it's very new, right? I mean, the True Diagnostic just announced their omics clock.
Right.
It's an omics clock. So they're looking at different metabolomic and proteomic and all the different omic clocks that we have. So, the thing is that the ability to measure right now is outstripping anything else. And it's still very, very new. So it's going to take probably now a year or two to say, okay, maybe, because I know that Bill in his study uses the True Diagnostic testing. So now maybe they'll say, okay, well, let's also look at these other clocks to see what maybe shifting. And, the interesting thing about the other clocks is if it gives you insight into, oh, you're kind of in trouble on this one, but not so much on that one, you might be able to turn your attention to a very specific area and lean into that.
And then really kind of hone in on like, rather than just, so I always look at this like with DNA testing, you might have a client come to you and they're taking all kinds of vitamins and supplements, and then you do their test and you're like, okay, we're going to get rid of a lot of this stuff. It's really just expensive pee. You don't need it. So I think it could be the same thing, right? Where you can really hone in on which kind of bioregulator you need to.
Right. And you might do one every 6 months, whereas another one you might do every 2 months, or you might do it for 2 or 3 months in a row and take a break. Like it's, it'll allow you maybe, and I don't know for sure, but perhaps it might allow you to pulse your bioregulators with more intention than otherwise. The way that Bill does it now and is that, you know, if you have like, for example, for me, I have a family history, a very strong family history of diabetes, and my genetics kind of line up with that. I'm at much higher risk of type 2 diabetes than another person might be. And so in that sense, number one, I eat in a certain way because obviously, you know, and you know, it's interesting, like I'm just going to be very mindful of watching my insulin sensitivity. So whatever my diet's going to be, and I'm going to remain diet agnostic here on this call. I'm not going to call it one way or the other because that's
great.
that's a maelstrom we don't want to go into. But I know that I'm prone to type 2 diabetes. So I'm going to keep an eye on my insulin sensitivity and my blood sugar. I'm going to watch my diet. I'm going to make sure that I exercise so that I can keep up my insulin sensitivity that way. But I might also, and I do also, repeat the pancreas bioregulator maybe more than someone who doesn't have an issue with blood sugar regulation, right? And I'll probably do the pancreas and the liver together. But you know, one of the things that's interesting, certainly even in Bill's study, is it's not always that important which ones you do together, as long as you're cycling through them with some kind of structure and intention. Either way, if I'm building a protocol for someone or myself, I kind of like okay, I'm working on my liver, pancreas, and stomach right now. Or I might say, okay, I'm giving my cardiovascular system some love. So I'm going to go after heart, blood vessel, and whatever else.
Okay. So, and you talked about the study that you're involved in. I mean, how far into the study are you now?
So I'm almost 2 years into the study. I just got actually I did retest. Interestingly enough, after 1 year, I actually lost a little bit of ground, which was a bit surprising. The factor that apparently has started to kind of make a mess of people's pace of aging, and my pace of aging was still really good, but I lost some ground on my telomeres. And that was, number one, I was under a huge amount of stress because I was building my business. But the other one is the big C, COVID.
Yeah.
So that spike protein has made a mess of a lot of people's systems. And it seems to have accelerated aging in a lot of people. So now the question is, are we going to see that diminishing over time? Are there protocols that need to be enacted to clear the spike protein out of people's systems? And we know that there are some people that are being much more affected by the spike protein than others. All these COVID long haulers, people that are dealing with ongoing issues. Whereas someone like me, I don't feel like I'm dealing with any issues. I had COVID. It lasted 5 days, threw the kitchen sink at it. But nevertheless, 3 months later, I lost a lot of hair in January. So this thing was still there, right? I mean, the hair loss is an outcome of what happened 3 months ago, but nevertheless, as some people get through it easier than others, but definitely there are people walking around right now who are really still dealing with a lot of consequences.
Yes.
And so
I know people who are still dealing with long COVID or have had kind of medical issues that have come out of COVID. And yeah, I think over the long haul, as you say, where like what we're just starting to see now, the fallout of what the last couple of years is, how it's taking a toll on people, and where are we going to go with the treatment of that. But I want to get back to something else with the bioregulators. So you talked about obviously diabetics, they could be taking insulin, and they could also be taking the bioregulator too. Perhaps people who have a thyroid issue, if they're taking, a medication like Synthroid or something like that. So is it safe to kind of stack these bioregulators as well as taking a medication?
So everything I've seen, read, and observed is I haven't seen an interaction with a drug, and I've not read that there is such a thing. Now, having said that, I will say to the audience, I never say never.
Yeah.
There's always a first time. Having said that, with thyroid in particular, the bioregulator can be used, from everything I've seen, with either a hyperthyroid or a hypothyroid person.
Mhm.
And that really brings us back to that concept that it's enabling the body to regulate itself. So it's really about coming back into balance rather than, this isn't a medication, right?
Right.
This isn't a
Right.
medication that's trying to block a pathway or force a pathway. This is
Mhm.
something that's trying to, if you want to think of it, it's trying to help the body to do what it does better. What I have observed in my communities is sometimes people will have to reduce, titrate their meds down
Mm,
because
mm.
all of a sudden the system's coming back online.
Right.
I will not say that that's the norm with thyroid. I mean, I think
Mm.
thyroid, like every other issue in the human body, is complex. It can be
You're
for
right.
any number of reasons. It could be like a 50-year-old or 30-year-old issue, in which case it's going to be pretty hard to convince the body to kind of
Mhm.
just forget about the last 30 years and go back to itself. But definitely we've seen a lot of people who have found that they're able to titrate their medication, or in a couple of cases where people are using less insulin. But this is
Mm.
always when they're monitoring, right?
Mhm.
Nobody's
Mhm.
ever advised to throw your drugs off to the
Yeah.
side and just jump on a bioregulator, because that would be a really bad idea.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, um, if someone was looking to kind of start to, say, take these, experiment with them, what would you recommend for someone to, like, they've never really kind of been exposed to this yet. They kind of want to start. Where would you suggest that people start with this?
In what way? Like, in terms of which one would they start with,
Yeah,
or?
just, like, so they like, look, I just want to feel better. There's nothing in particular, but I just, maybe I want more energy, or, just a little bit more get up and go.
Yeah.
Where would we start?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I will answer that the way that I answer 99% of the questions I get asked in my communities. And the answer is nobody really likes this answer. As a matter of fact, there are people who hate this answer, and it depends, right?
Right.
It comes down to, why is your energy low? Why
Okay.
do you feel, why are you lacking get up and go? So
Mhm.
is it a sleep issue? Is it a hormonal issue? Is
Gotcha.
it a, like, do you not go to bed until 4 o'clock in the morning? Like, like, what's the issue? What is the what are any of the identifiable reasons why you might be experiencing this symptom? Having said that, I would say that the pineal gland bioregulator, epidolon or endolutin, as we know, it has many names. But epidolon is a really nice place to start, simply because if we can regulate, if we can normalize circadian rhythm, if we can
Mhm.
normalize melatonin production, if we can help to bring some balance to the endocrine system, then a lot of things are going to fall into place from a downstream level. So I will say that some people use epidolon and are like, oh my God, my sleep is amazing. Like, it's remarkable, right? We have other people who use epidolon and are like, nothing. I'm
Right.
feeling nothing. I got nothing. Right. So, and this is why I just want to be very mindful for your audience to say that sometimes people will really feel an effect, and other times people will experience nothing. And it could be for any number of reasons. One is it's not the right thing. Two is you don't really have that much going on. It's a little bit of a under the hood fine tuning. You're not going to feel much of a difference. Or three is it's not enough to overcome whatever the other forces are that are driving the issue that you've got. But, one thing I will say is that in a lot of the studies that we read in the literature, they're using the bioregulator with sometimes like conventional treatment, right? So there was the
Right.
study on people with COPD, and they had the one group only got the drug, and the other group got the drug and the bioregulators, and the
Mhm.
group that got the drug and the bioregulators had a much better outcome.
Right. Right. So we're really looking at this to kind of augment, perhaps treatment that we're already taking, or really just to augment our system depending on what it is that we're focusing on. Whether it's, as you said, we want to give our heart some love, we want to give our pancreas, kidneys, some love. We're really focusing on what that is. Um, so, you know, you talked about cycling them as well. Like, how long do you usually take the bioregulators in the stacks that you do?
Okay. Great question. Depends. So, so if you have nothing really going on and you're saying, okay, you know what, I'm 40 years old. I feel like I should do something to, make myself better. So you might do a 30-day cycle of Epidolon. And let's say you might say, okay, I'm going to do a 30-day cycle of pineal gland, blood vessel, and thymus, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to do that twice a year, 6 months apart. And
Okay.
that might be great, right?
Right.
Someone who's a little bit older, like in their 50s, might do it 3 times a year or 4 times a year. It kind of depends, right? For
Mhm.
someone who is having sleep issues and says, okay, I think Epidolon, I feel like it did something for me in that 30 days, but we're not quite done yet. So what they might do is then in subsequent months, they might do 10 days, 10-day cycles for a
Okay.
couple of months following that initial 30-day loading period, if you will.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay. Right.
And then you'll have other cases where you might do 2 months because you've got something major, like
Mm.
not like something more intense going on, and you need a stronger intervention. And so you might do 2 months in a row of 30 days and then do a couple of 10-day a month cycles coming out of it. So I will say that with this stuff, what I'm learning is that there's a lot of science behind it, but there's a lot of art to how it's applied, and there's a lot of latitude.
Okay.
It's not a hard and fast thing.
Right. Yeah.
And
And, as we always say, everybody is unique, and how these compounds affect us is always unique. As you said, some people are like, I don't even know what it's doing. And other people are like, wow, I had such a great effect on this. So yeah, it depends. That's great. So Natalie, I've really enjoyed our conversation. You've definitely spread some light on these bioregulators, these compounds, definitely leaving us with wanting to know more information. So if you could just once again let listeners know where they can find out more about this, and perhaps even dig into it a little bit more with you, that would be great.
thank you. So again, I'll point you to my website, natniddam.com. There's not that there's a whole lot of information on the peptides there, but that's where you're going to find out all the things that I do. Sign up for the newsletter. At some point, I am planning to put out a bioregulator crash course to just help people get oriented. But if people join my Mighty Networks community in there, I have a document made available for the community that lists all the different bioregulators and what they do. And there are many, many different names. So that's a really nice resource in there.
Excellent.
And then, of course, there's the podcast where I'm always looking for and interviewing different people, both about peptides and bioregulators and all the other lifestyle kind of, you know, and supplement and health tech hacks that we
Yeah.
have at our disposal that seem to be growing in number with every passing moment.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly the field of just kind of longevity and biohacking, if you like, is expanding so rapidly. It just seems that every moment, as you say, there's something new on the horizon. It's exciting, and also a little perplexing sometimes as well to know where to start. But yeah, it is truly an emerging field in every moment. So I have a question. It's something I ask my guests at the end of the show, and that is, what are you doing to intentionally thrive?
Right now I'm hiring people to help me. But really, truly, yeah. I mean, I think as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you're in the same boat, we start off with so gung ho and we do it all ourselves. And then all of a sudden you wake up one morning and go, wait a minute, I think I need to get some help, because all of a sudden I'm finding it much harder to practice what I preach. Finding it harder to get to bed at a good time or manage my stress
Mhm.
or get my
Mhm.
workouts in when I want to. So I mean, right now, I think that the most important thing I can do, and then what I am focusing on right now, is kind of getting recentered and taking my own good advice, right? Focusing
Right.
on sleep, focusing on managing my stress. The diet part I've got pretty dialed in just because, I've been at it for so many years. The exercise piece, I've got a lot of exercise hacks at my disposal, so I don't have to spend 2 hours in a gym on any given day. But yeah, it's to me, it really comes down to the sleep and the stress management piece is, I feel like once we get that dialed in, everything else
Yeah.
gets easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. Sleep and stress management are vitally important to our health. And there is only one of us, so we have to make that number one in our lives. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. It's been fascinating. I look forward to finding out more, as I'm sure the listeners will too. And again, thank you for listening to the Best Living Show. I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another fascinating show. Enjoy your evening. Again, thank you for listening to the Best Living Show. Thanks for listening to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life on transformationtalkradio.com. Tune in Thursdays at 6 p.m. to continue your new narrative and step into a new way of being. We are not what people have told us we are. We are so much more than that. I am going to help you thrive and get the answers you desire, not only in the external world, but on the inside. For more information, go to drrachelsweet.com. That's drrachelsweet.com.